if we're going to imagine a new kind of politics, then might be a good idea to start with taking a look at some of the labels. Do the terms Republican or Democrat mean anything anymore? The Republican Party was built around abolishing slavery. That certainly doesn't seem to be its message anymore, although if it was its message, it'd be a lot more successful because that kind of mental slavery is running rampant in the country right now. Meanwhile, Brandon Strega, had his walk away from the Democratic Party, was just simply removed from Facebook because it was dangerous, because it was effective. So it's not just Republicans who are feeling this, it's Democrats as well. And watching 10 Republican congressmen, representatives, vote in favor of impeachment before any investigation had occurred whatsoever. And as we pointed out in yesterday's show, the Post now admits that Trump did not incite a riot in Washington, should tell you that these terms don't really mean anything in terms of our values anymore. Now, when we go looking at new politics and we're trying to get new voters, you definitely want to throw as wide a net as possible, but you don't want to throw a net so wide that you no longer contain your own values or that you contain values antithetical to your values. So what is it really that we're talking about? What is the divide? There's no question. There's an enormous divide in America, but I think that divide is not only in America, that divide is going on around the world, around the Western world anyway. And we're getting emails from Scotland and Australia, New Zealand, everywhere, all around the world saying they really like this message because I think it's resonating with people. So what's the difference? Well, certainly one difference is collectivism versus individualism, and that probably is kind of the core emotional attractor that pulls people to one side of the politics or the other. But I think it becomes clearer and clearer every day that what's really going on in this country is a war between the elites and the people. It's elitists versus populists. And to me, there's no question about this. The Democratic Party used to be the party of the little guy, used to be the party of the working man. That was their brand. Now they're the party of tech billionaires, determined to keep their hold on power and in order to be able to control everything, and so on and so on and so on. So I would like to talk about this idea that was linked to an article today in Instapundit. I thought it was a brand new article. Turns out the date was August 17th of 2019, but it's dead on perfect. It's in the New York Post. It's written by Rob Henderson. And the article is called "Luxury Beliefs Are the Latest Status Symbol for Rich Americans." I'm going to read just a couple of quotes from this article, and then we'll talk about this because I think this is really the entire dynamic of what's going on with wokeness. So Rob goes on to write, "The upper class benefits socially from decrying its own privilege while paying no actual price for it." That is the essence of what virtue signaling is. Virtue signaling is an attempt to show people that you're virtuous without having to pay a price for it. If you actually did the work, then it wouldn't be virtue signaling anymore. That'd just be virtue. So virtue signaling is the ability to send a message to other people that you are on the team without having any possible negative impact on you. He goes on to write, in the past, upper-class Americans used to display their social status with luxury goods. Today, they do it with luxury beliefs. When I heard that term luxury belief, it hit me the same way that virtue signaling did. First time I heard virtue signaling as an expression, I immediately understood it. And luxury beliefs is another one of those terms that's just so dead on that it explains itself. He goes on, "We feel pressure to display our status in new ways. This is why fashionable clothing always changes. But as trendy clothes and other products become more accessible and affordable, there is increasingly less status attached to luxury goods." This kind of goes to what I was saying about Gavin Newsom. And as an example, why is it that Gavin Newsom would allow the city of San Francisco, arguably the most beautiful city in America and maybe in the world, why would he allow that city to decay to the point where there were needles and human feces on the streets and so much of them that you had to have an Apple app so that you could avoid the worst of it? Why would he do that? You would think that as mayor of that city, with essentially unlimited money and power, you do everything in your ability to make the city as beautiful as possible and to raise the standards as high as you could. But this is, of all of the natural-born aristocrats I've ever seen in modern American life, Gavin Newsom takes the cake. And Gavin Newsom wants people to walk through feces in the streets of San Francisco specifically to show that he doesn't have to. And that's why he can go to the French Laundry and sit shoulder to shoulder with people, many of them healthcare lobbyists and advisors, by the way. No masks, indoors, 4 or 5 months ago now. Why? Well, that's why Gavin Newsom does what he does. He wants to be able to make rules for other people, but the main thing is that the elitists need to increase the distance between themselves and the rest of people, not narrow it. We like to think that a rising American middle class and all boats rise in a rising tide is a really good idea. And it takes a lot of effort for people like us, for populists like us who want everybody to do well, to appreciate that we're at the point now where there's been so much luxury diffused through our population that in order to show your status, one of the things you do is you use the specific set of beliefs, but more importantly, a set of beliefs that not only doesn't close the distance between you and the middle class, actually increases it. And Rob goes on to make a couple of great examples about that. The upper classes have found a clever solution to the problem: luxury beliefs. These are ideas and opinions that confer status on the rich at very little cost while taking a toll on the lower class. That's something I'd never really realized about these luxury beliefs. He goes on with the example of monogamy and basically lists an example in his article of this young, very affluent, very elitist, very left-wing woman who talks about how monogamy time has come and it's time to end it. And then he asks her, well, are you going to get married? Well, yes. Well, then if you're going to get married, why are you against marriage? I just think it's that society's outgrown it. So here's the cost of those luxury beliefs on the part of the elitists that want to rule over all of us. Back to Rob's article. In the 1960s, marriage rates between upper class and lower class Americans were nearly identical. But during this time, affluent Americans loosened social norms, expressing skepticism about marriage and monogamy. This luxury belief contributed to the erosion of the family. Today, the marriage rates of affluent Americans are nearly the same as they were in the 1960s, but working class people are far less likely to get married. Furthermore, out-of-wedlock birth rates are more than 10 times higher than they were in 1960, mostly among the poor and working class. Affluent people seldom have kids out of wedlock, but are more likely than others to express the luxury belief that doing so is of no consequence. This article brings up something that I'd never really fully realized. I had always thought that virtue signaling was designed to elevate the person doing the virtue signaling, and there's no question that's the motivation of it. But the idea that virtue signaling could actually cause harm, genuine harm, to the people, of course, that you're ostensibly being virtuous about, is something that I don't think I fully realized until I read this article. He goes on. Another luxury belief is that religion is irrational or harmful. Members of the upper class are more likely to be atheists or non-religious, but they have the resources and access to thrive without the unifying social edifice of religion. Places of worship are often essential for the social fabric of poor communities. Denigrating the importance of religion harms the poor. White, affluent people often find meaning in their work, but most Americans do not have the luxury of a profession. They have jobs. They clock in, they clock out. Without a family or community to care for, such a job can feel meaningless. Here's another luxury belief. This is back to the article again. White privilege is the luxury belief that took me the longest to understand because I grew up around poor whites. This is the author speaking. Often, members of the upper class claim that racial disparities stem from inherent advantages held by whites. Yet Asian Americans are more educated, have higher earnings, and live longer than whites. Affluent whites are the most enthusiastic about the idea of white privilege, yet they are the least likely to incur any costs for promoting that belief. Rather, they raise their social standing by talking about their privilege. And here comes the money quote. In other words, upper-class whites gain status by talking about their high status. When laws are enacted to combat white privilege, it won't be the privileged whites that are harmed. Poor whites will bear the brunt. Amen for that. Amen for that. So this isn't just something kind of obnoxious and repulsive and preening and arrogant and self-centered and narcissistic and all the rest. It's not just the sight of somebody strolling down the street waving their diamond stick pins of ideology and burning, lighting their cigarettes with $100 bills of ideology. It's worse than that. It's actually damaging the rest of us. And their contempt for the rest of us is so extraordinary that I don't think it's going to take much explanation. But if you want to look at the last couple of months, and look at the attitudes of the CEOs of Twitter or Facebook, YouTube, Google, and their attitude towards the regular people, if you don't understand the disdain and really the disgust inherent in saying that I know what's better for those people than they do, they're not capable of making their own decisions. They're just not smart enough, and they're not moral enough. If we tell them that a terrorist attack was started by having somebody screaming Allahu Akbar at the top of their lungs, well, we can't tell regular people that, because if we do, they're so ignorant and so hate-filled that they'll just go down the streets of America and pull Muslims out of their homes and beat them to death in the streets with tire irons. Well, it didn't happen. It didn't happen in the days and hours after 9/11. But that's not important to them. This is how they maintain their sense of superiority. So why don't we test this theory against some real-world examples? Why don't we start with the response to COVID-19? The elitist position is that this is a killer epidemic and everyone must remain locked down in their house until Dr. Fauci says it's safe to come out. Now, a lot of that's just driven by cowardice, and that's one of the qualities I notice about these elitists, is that they tend to be people who are genuinely physically cowards. But most of it really has to come down to this. The people I find who are most in favor of continuing the lockdown are the people that continue to get paid. And the people who are most in favor of going back to work are the people who are not getting paid. I believe, and I've believed since April or May, that in a pandemic situation like this, it ought to be just national policy that all of the healthcare, not the healthcare workers, the public health officials, that they basically stop being paid. Anytime they lock the population down, their salary gets cut. And it gets cut until it's released. Because it's no skin off of their nose for them to say, well, we need another 6 months of lockdown. Certainly no skin off of Gavin Newsom's nose. He's not getting paid by the hour. He doesn't get paid whether or not the California businesses close or go out of business. He gets paid, and what he gets paid for his job is insignificant compared to where his real money comes from. So Gavin Newsom can say, no, we're going to have to go through another year of lockdown. And it doesn't cost him anything. What it does do is it shows all of the other elitists his high status by being able to order the proles around. It shows the other elitists his high status by saying, yeah, I can do a year without income, no problem, because I'm a politician and I'm a powerful man. And most of all, it gives him that sense of specialness. That's really what it is. It's just plain specialness. It is just a narcissistic hole in the soul that has to be filled by telling other people what to do. So, the people that are in favor of locking the country down are the people who continue to get paid. The people who are about going back to work are people who are not getting paid. And the reason that there's a difference between these two positions is because the people who are not getting paid have to put the pandemic into a larger context, which is the context of, yes, there's a risk that I could go out there and get sick. There's a risk I could get sick and die and infect my whole family. The risk is relatively low, but at some point, even if it was a more fatal disease, even if it was a much more fatal disease, some point, I would still have to go out that door and go to work to feed my family, because while COVID may or may not kill me, and the chances of it killing me if I'm a young, healthy person is essentially zero, the fact is that if I don't go out and work, my entire family is going to starve to death. And so this is not a decision that has to be made. This is a self-deciding issue. If the choice is stay at home and literally starve to death, or go out into the world and face the virus and hope for the best, even in the case of a serious outbreak like yellow fever, you find people taking the option to go out and risk it, because otherwise it's certain death. But the elitists don't feel this. Do you think that the New York Times people and Dr. Fauci and all the rest of them, do you think that they're in danger of starving, that they're not going to be able to make the rent? Of every person you've ever heard saying you have to stay locked down, it's absolutely critical, you cannot go out of the house, and mask deniers are criminals, of all of those people, have you ever heard one of them who is in genuine hardship and is really beginning to wonder not only where I can make my next rent payment, but how I'm going to make my next dinner payment? This is the war that's going on in America, and it's going on around the world. It's the war between the elitists who enact policies that damage the population, raise their social status, and, since both of these things are happening simultaneously, provides their genuine motivation, which is to separate them even further from the people that they've been presumably elected to care for and to watch over. Let's take another example of a woke religious dogma. Let's talk about global warming. And I'm not going to get into whether global warming is real or not for the sake of the argument. For the sake of the argument, let's just say that it's true. When you hear somebody say that, and they say carbon emissions have to be reduced, what that means is you have to either close down jobs and close down and shrink the economy, or you have to do something like go to windmill power or solar power or whatever. Now, that source of electricity, at least in Nevada, where they had those giant solar plants out there, my understanding last time I heard was that electricity from those solar plants was something like 3 times more expensive, not 30% more expensive, 3 times more expensive than what it was coming from natural gas or oil or hydro or whatever. So why are the elites talking about these carbon emissions and a green economy? They're talking about them because they can afford to pay higher electric bills, and poor people can't. And so they are going to elevate themselves into other people's misery. And that's the dynamic. We're going to elevate ourselves into other people's misery. We're going to promote, and if we get elected into office or have influence over people in office, we're not only going to promote, we're going to insist upon, we're going to coerce people to follow beliefs that make no sense really, that benefit us, certainly don't harm us, and that increases the distance between the elites and the people. Global warming is a great example of that. And you can go on and on and on and on and on. So, as we continue to watch this latest chapter in American history, what we're going to see, and what we're seeing already from day one, is that all of these woke theories, all of these woke philosophies, all of these woke appointments are there to signal to other elitists that the elitists are in control now. It is a secret handshake. It's the equivalent of the Masons. It's exactly the same as the Freemasons, who I have nothing against, by the way. The Freemasons began in the Middle Ages as sort of the first union, the first guild. When every city in Europe needed to build, every significant city needed to build a cathedral, which is a monumental engineering job. There were very, very, very few people in the Middle Ages who had the architectural skill to design and build cathedrals. And because they were so rare and so in demand, these people realized that if we band together, then basically we can protect ourselves and we can set our own prices and so on and so forth. That's where Masonry comes from. Masonry is working with stone. The first Freemasons were stone workers and architects who could build cathedrals. And that really became kind of the first guild or powerful union. And Masons then developed a society that was based upon the fact that we are to some degree elitist because we know how to do these things. And in order to signal to each other that they were in the club, they would have secret handshakes or secret signals or so on. And that would be their way of communicating to each other that we're basically in a class above the rest of the people in the community. And that's exactly what all of this woke stuff is. Every time you hear a white person saying, oh, we've got to do something about white privilege, the two things you can count on are, number one, that person is doing it in order to raise their social status, and number two, they will not pay any price whatsoever for having said that. And third of the 2 points, they will also cause genuine and irreparable harm to the people that they claim to be so sympathetic to. I just want a federal government that will fit back into the box that it came in. And that's the goal, is to reduce the ability of elitists to tell us what to do, to take away their power. Facebook, Google, Twitter, all of them, the news media, Hollywood, movies, television, all of it's all trumpeting the same message. And it's a message from a very, very, very small group of very, very, very insecure, broken people. And they're designed to appeal to our decency and make us submit to what they want to do to us. We're not going to do it. So that'll do it for this edition, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, a much larger family than it was 8 weeks ago, and continue to grow. And thanks again for the support, and we will see you tomorrow right here on Moving Back to America.